Hello, my 420 Spot family, good news today from yesterday or so. Connecticut lawmakers send psychedelic treatment program proposal to governor as part of budget bill. Connecticut lawmakers sent the governor a large-scale budget bill on Tuesday that includes provisions to set the state up to provide certain patients with access to psychedelic-assisted treatment using substances like MDMA and psilocybin. The language largely mirrors a standalone bill that moved through the committee earlier this session. However, the budget legislation is more limited concerning who would be eligible for the treatment option compared to the standalone proposal. The budget measure cleared the House on Monday and then passed the Senate on Tuesday. It now heads to the governor. Under both the budget bill and HB 5396, psychedelic treatment centers would be established in the state where people could receive psilocybin-assisted or MDMA-assisted therapy as part of an expanded access program for investigational new drugs through the Federal Food and Drug Administration, FDA. While the legislation would not legalize psychedelics, it would set up a regulatory infrastructure to enable Connecticut to play a leading role in providing access to this alternative treatment option as federal agencies continue to fund and facilitate clinical trials. Psychedelic therapy would be specifically provided and funded for military veterans, retired first responders, and healthcare workers under the budget measure. The standalone bill, meanwhile, was more expansive by also including any person from a historically underserved community, and who has a serious or life-threatening mental or behavioral health disorder and without access to effective mental or behavioral health medication. Governor Ned Lamont, D., signed a separate bill last year that includes language requiring the state to carry out a study into the therapeutic potential of psilocybin mushrooms. A work group has since been meeting to investigate the issue. The new budget measure approved by the legislature, as well as the standalone bill, would require the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to launch a psychedelic-assisted therapy pilot program to provide qualified patients with the funding to receive MDMA or psilocybin therapy as part of FDA's expanded access program. The pilot program would cease when MDMA and psilocybin have been approved to have a medical use by the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, or any successor agency. At that point, state statutes on the substances would be aligned with the federal government's. The legislation would further establish a qualified patients for approved treatment sites fund to provide grants to qualified applicants to provide MDMA-assisted or psilocybin-assisted therapy to qualified patients under the pilot program. Another difference between the newly passed budget measure and the earlier standalone bill is that the latter called for $3 million to be appropriated to the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services from the general fund to facilitate the treatment centers, whereas the former simply provides funding within available appropriations. Both measures would further create a Connecticut Psychedelic Treatment Advisory Board under the department. Legislative leaders and the governor would be empowered to appoint members of the board. The board would be tasked with making recommendations on the design and development of the regulations and infrastructure necessary to safely allow for therapeutic access to psychedelic-assisted therapy upon the legalization of MDMA, psilocybin, and any other psychedelic compounds. There would be 7 key areas that the board would be responsible for advising the department on. Reviewing and considering the data from the psychedelic-assisted therapy pilot program, to inform the development of such regulations. Advising the department on the necessary education, training, licensing, and credentialing of therapists and facilitators, patient safety, harm reduction, the establishment of equity measures in both clinical and therapeutic settings, cost and insurance reimbursement considerations, and standards of treatment facilities. Advising the department on the use of group therapy and other therapy options to reduce cost and maximize public health benefits from psychedelic treatments. Monitoring updated federal regulations and guidelines for referral and consideration by the state agencies of cognizance for implementation of such regulations and guidelines. Developing a long-term strategic plan to improve mental health care through the use of psychedelic treatment. Recommending equity measures for clinical subject recruitment and facilitator training recruitment. Assisting with the development of public awareness and education campaigns. Also in Connecticut, Regulators recently began accepting certain marijuana business license applications as part of the recreational cannabis law that Lamont signed last year. Alright, let's hope the governor signs this and our veterans can get the help need for PTSD and more. Thank you for watching this video.